I didn't start. I started playing guitar. I guess it was in 1961 or so. I was a sophomore in high school.
Did you teach yourself how to play?
I taught myself how to play guitar.
Oh my!
And later, when I was 35, I taught myself to play piano. So I don't learn well from others.
But apparently, you are a quick study when it comes to music.
Yes. I had wanted to play for so long that I think I'd actually been teaching myself all those years. It's like reading. When I was a little kid, my parents read to me, and I always wanted to learn to read. And my parents kept saying, no, 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 wait, when you're in the first grade, you'll learn to read. So the first day I came home from school, I could read. I guess I'd been teaching myself on the sly.
Well, that's a great asset, I think, to have. When you finished did you play any music in high school? I mean, were you part of the school band or anything? Or?
I was in the school band for about, I don't know, a month until the guy figured out I couldn't read music, the band leader. But no, I played guitar. I started playing guitar the summer between my sophomore and junior years. And by junior year, I was playing in talent shows, and by senior year, I was doing gigs.
Wow.
So, but I basically locked myself in a room for 2 months and taught myself guitar. I mean, I didn't learn everything about guitar, but I learned enough to
right. But to be able to perform, absolutely.
Be able to perform.
That's wonderful. What about after high school?
Well, after high school, I played on and off. I played music in clubs and coffee houses and wherever they would have me. On and off, I had sometimes I had a day job, but most of the time I played music, and I'm still playing music.
That's great. Well, again, you moved around, though, didn't you? I mean,
I did. Oh, gee. When I left high school, I moved to Brazil for a few months.
What brought you to Brazil?
Well, my father was living in Brazil, and I went and stayed with him for a while. It was a wonderful experience, but I was very upset. I was just out of high school. The poverty, it was just, I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't turn off my feelings about it. So anyway, I left Brazil. Moved to New York City, moved to Cleveland, then I moved to Chicago, which was still is my home in my heart. I loved Chicago. I lived there for most of the 60s.
The Chicago music scene must have been stimulating, wasn't it?
It was very stimulating, but they didn't want to hear me. I couldn't even get an audition. People would look at me and say, "Oh, we don't do folk music here," and I'd say, "But I don't do folk music." And then acoustic blues was not of much interest to people in Chicago at that time. It was electric, and I loved electric blues, but I don't play electric guitar. It's a whole different instrument. It's like the difference between piano and organ. I mean, it looks similar, but it's really not. And I enjoyed listening to it, but I really wanted to play acoustic, so.
Well, let's explain a little bit about acoustic guitars and blues, and get some frame of reference here as to what music is like and how you deal with it.
Well, I mean, my style is very much my own, but there's basically two styles of guitar, ignoring the acoustic and electric factor for a while. In acoustic guitar, there's basically two styles. There's what they call Piedmont style, which is what I play, which is almost like a piano. You're playing a lot of notes. And then there's Delta, Mississippi Delta style, where you're playing basically one note at a time. And that evolved. I'm not a scholar, but it feels like that is what turned into electric blues. I mean, a lot of those people, Muddy Waters, for example, came out of that Mississippi Delta background, and I mean, he was the god of. Anyway, Chicago had a lot of people from the Delta, from that first generation who moved up to Chicago, and I got to see them all, and it was wonderful. Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and just a lot of people. An acoustic, to me, an electric guitar, for one thing, people use a pick as a general rule, and they're playing one note at a time. Sometimes doing things with the rest of their hand, but usually not. And I mean, I've never been able to use a pick. I keep wanting to throw it away and use my fingers. So I think part of that style for me comes from having heard Big Bill Broonzy and Brownie McGee and Josh White and Tampa Red, people who did the kind of style that I do. But also, I think part of it, my father played classical guitar. And of course, he used his fingers. And I used to watch him and listen, and I enjoyed that. So I think I've probably gotten some idea from that.
Well, is the acoustic guitar particularly good for blues, or does it make a difference?
It's good for everything.
It's good for everything.
Everything. Country, blues, I mean, it's just the music, it's just the instrument, it's just a tool. You can make anything out of any kind of instrument.
Did you play with any other musicians when you were in Chicago?
No, not just jam sessions once in a while, but most of my life I've played solo. And I'm trying to think, did I? No, not really.
Well, what brought you to Virginia?
Ah.
Was there a path between Chicago and Virginia that was direct, or did you stop on route?
It was direct. There were a lot of factors. One was that my daughter was having difficulty with the air. At that time, they burnt soft coal. I mean, you could wipe off the windowsill and there would be specks of black on it by the time you'd wrung out your rag. And that was all going into her lungs. And, the steel mills were going up in Gary and Hammond. And the doctor suggested that perhaps I should leave the area for that reason. She was having bronchial problems.
How old was she at the time?
5. She was 5. And another reason was that it was so inhospitable to me as a musician. For a lot of reasons. One was that I played acoustic blues. One was that I was a woman. I mean, there weren't any women that were, in the scene. All of the gatekeepers were men. And they, I think they had another place for women other than on the stage. So I was pretty disgusted, and I decided I wasn't going to play anymore at all, except in my home. So I moved to Virginia. My mom was living here. I found a place in Spotsylvania. Because I was a single mom, it was good to have my mom nearby.
Sure.
And I decided I wasn't going to play anymore. So I went down to the local music store to pick up some strings. And a fellow there named Darryl Riddle talked to me for a while and said he'd like to hear me play. I played a little bit for him, and he said, "I know this man you've got to meet." So we went to meet this man, John Jackson, who lived up in Northern Virginia. And he was wonderful, and we jammed and, had a great time talking. And a couple of nights later, I went out to hear him play at a place in Fredericksburg, or near Fredericksburg, out on Route 1. I can't remember the name of it. And he jollied me up on stage, and that was the end of my retirement. So I found a real home in Fredericksburg. The music scene here is just terrific.
What year was it that you came?
1971.